My name is Rebecca. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of the co-directors of the Notebooks Collective. Founded in 2021, we are a virtual literary arts space focused on community, connection, and continued learning. Our next in conversation will be March 18th at 7:30 p.m. And our first class of 2025 with poet Jessica Cuello persona poems will be on March 2nd, which is this Sunday. There's still space. If you are interested, you can check out our website at thenotebookscollective.com. The Notebooks Collective believes that Black Lives Matter and acknowledges that as a virtual organization, our offices are on the lands of the Kickapoo, Nipmuc, Agawam, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket tribes. Native peoples across the world continue to preserve and celebrate their culture, and we encourage you to support Native writers and artists. As we do this land acknowledgement, we want to recognize those who are suffering from conquest and terror in Ukraine, Gaza, and elsewhere. Our thoughts are with them. We know that these are extremely stressful times, and we are glad you have joined us tonight to celebrate community. I will now welcome Lisa to introduce our presenters.
Thank you, Becca. So I'm curious if you've ever encountered a poet whose work feels like home, but also challenges you in ways that you didn't realize you could be challenged. You'll hear our guests talk tonight about how they met at Solstice, the same low residency MFA program where Becca and I met. While our time there, didn't overlap with Maria Luisa's, I was lucky enough to meet and work with Dzvinia Orlowsky. She was my faculty advisor for my critical thesis semester. And Dzvinia, I apologize if I never told you this, but I was terrified to work with you.
Oh no.
Terrified to work with you. I think that's what happens when you finally sit down with a person whose work you so deeply revere and whose literary life you so admire. I found out very quickly that there was no need for me to be afraid. For those of you who haven't been fortunate enough to meet her, you'll learn tonight that Dzvinia is the embodiment of the real deal. She's warm and welcoming, insightful and curious, playful and funny, and she genuinely cares about her students. And to say that she's a phenomenal poet, well, talk about having absolutely no words. In her most recent collection, Those Absences Now Closest, her innate voice rings clear. She is candid and hopeful, realistic and gentle, tender even when the world is unbearable. This collection of poems cuts quickly to the heart of generational trauma, a language I understand even though I've not lived through the same circumstances. And that's what real poetry does, right? It reminds us that we all feel pain and joy and regret and loss, even if our lives look different on the outside. Maria Luisa's latest collection, Thought Here Would Cure Me of There, does the same. I am a white woman living in suburban Kansas, and yet I've let myself get lost in relationships. I've moved around looking for who I really was, and I too have fallen too easily for the music of a man's voice. All this is to say that tonight isn't just an in conversation between two remarkable poets. It's also a recognition and celebration of the things that make us human, no matter how different we might think we are or how different we might seem. We are so grateful that these two poets are here with us tonight. I'll move on to their official bios and then we'll turn the floor over to them. Dzvinia Orlowsky, a Pushcart Prize poet, translator, a Four-Way Books founding editor, has authored 7 poetry collections with Carnegie Mellon University Press, including Bad Harvest, a 2019 Massachusetts Book Awards must-read in poetry, and her most recent, Those Absences Now Closest. She is a recipient of a Massachusetts Cultural Council Poetry Grant, a New England Poetry Club's Sheila Motten Book Award, co-recipient of a 2016 National Endowment for the Arts, and her first collection, A Handful of Bees, was reprinted as part of the Carnegie Mellon University Press Classic Contemporary Series. Her poem sequence, The Disenchanted Desna, was a winner of the 2019 New England Poetry Club's Samuel Washington Allen Prize, selected by Robert Pinsky. Ali Kinsella and Dzvinia's co-translations from the Ukrainian of Natalka, I should have asked this one too, Biletskervit's Eccentric Days of Hope and Sorrow was a finalist for the 2022 Griffin International Poetry Prize. the 2022 Derek Walcott Poetry Prize, Alta's 2022 National Translation Award, and a winner of the 2020-2021 AAUS Prize for Translation. They received a 2024 NEA Translation Fellowship for their translation of Halnya Kruk's Lost in Living, Lost Horse Press 2024, and their co-translation of Oleksandr Dovzhensko's novella Enchanted Desna is forthcoming from Lost Horse Press in 2025. My apologies to those creatives. Maria Luisa, born in Manatí, Puerto Rico, and raised in Springfield, Massachusetts. María Luisa Arroyo Cruzado received a BA from Colby College and an MA from Tufts University in German, her third language. The opportunity to work with poets Dzvinia Orlowsky and Laurent Basselar under poet Meg Carney's transformational leadership led her to pursue her MFA at Pine Manor College, which she earned in July 2015. Currently, she is a Clark Diversity Fellow, joyfully pursuing a PhD in comparative literature at Binghamton University. Maria Luisa writes poetry and prose that code switch between American English, Puerto Rico Spanish, German, and Farsi, the cultural languages of her experiences. Her collections include Thought Here Would Cure Me of There, Lily Poetry Review Books 2024, Landscapes, Photos and Poems, Multi-Creative Wisdom 2023, Resistencia, Resilience, Essays and Poems, Human Error Publishing 2023, Destierro means more than exile, a tribute to 32 women poets 2018, and Gathering Words, Recogiendo Palabras, Bilingual Press Editorial, Bilingua 2008. In 2024, she curated and published Panoply, the inaugural multi-creative wisdom anthology featuring creative writers who identify as women or non-binary and as BIPOC. For 18 years plus of facilitating poetry workshops and readings, many in partnership with the Springfield City Library, she was named the inaugural Poet Laureate of Springfield, Massachusetts, for which she served from 2014 to 2016, and a New England Public Radio's Arts and Humanities recipient in 2016. In May 2024, she received an honorary degree in fine arts from Smith College in recognition of her impact as a multilingual Boricua poet and intersexual feminist educator. I am very happy to turn the floor over to Dzvinia and Maria Luisa.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for that amazing introduction, and Becca for your support and all that you do for Notebooks Collective. It is such an important endeavor to record and bring these conversations that feel, so intimate and joyful. We really respect what you're doing and are just absolutely thrilled to be a part of it. So thank you, and thank you everyone in attendance. I'm going to start off by just talking a little bit how I met Maria Luisa, which I think it was around 2015 at the Solstice MFA residency. And why we're here speaking today is that there was a deep connection that formed from the very first workshop. Not only is Maria Luisa a very warm and welcoming presence, which is wonderful to experience when walking into a first workshop, but in her work, I was immediately taken by our common interest in cultural language as a way of shaping identity, but also her ability to be expansive in what she was trying to say, but yet hone it down to a single image. So there was like the world in a raindrop in her work. And also she could see with soft eyes, but yet with hawk's precision. And most of all, what was important to me was that it seemed that in her work, there was like a literary spiritual calling, in the sense that spirituality was very important to her in shaping who she is, and that would carry forth throughout her work in the years to come.
Yeah, so Dzvinia, thank you for sharing that. And thank you again, Becca and Lisa, for coordinating this amazing online opportunity, and to borrow Laurent Bosselar's phrase, it's like poetry to me, I think poetry to us, Dzvinia, is church. A way for us to meditate, meditate in our spaces. And Swinny, you make me smile because we're using flying preachers as metaphors. Because Svinia did not know this until our conversation, but Svinia, when we had our first workshops, when I clearly remember my cohort peers over lunch were like, "Oh my gosh, she's got owl eyes. She could peer into our soul." And we were so startled, by that. Like I remember Taylor Gould, and forgive me, he had like his epithets. He's like, "Blank a day, blank a." But we're just marveling. I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And also that you knew, and again, and we said uncanny. We all agreed that you knew where our poems were going even before we knew, and we just didn't know how to describe it. So I had that joy in those first in the workshops. So of course I had to have you for my creative thesis. And you were so patient yet impatient at the same time, because in the sense that, Maria Luisa, when are you going to write your poems about your mother? These are all father heavy. And I was like, thank you. And with my mother's permission, my mother has a home altar. So with my mother's permission, I took photographs of my mother's altar and shared it with Dzvinia. And she goes, "Okay, these are still gestating here." So I thank you for Dzvinia again. There's this serendipity. But what I would love to invite you to do, Dzvinia, is could you please share a few of your poems? So for those in the audience, so that you know that each of us will share 3 poems, and then continue with our conversation.
Thank you so much, Maria Luisa, for recalling those events. And it's really wonderful to continue so many years later, over a decade, and have it feel so natural and so fresh. So Maria Luisa and I are going to each read 3 poems, and then depending, like when we have our conversation questions, we're probably going to fill in with a couple more poems, but just to get 3 off the bat. And I chose 2 from my previous book, Bad Harvest, because they're short, but they touch on subjects that I'll just briefly encapsulate. The first one has to do with Ukrainian being my first language, then having a sense of losing it as I got older. And I'll just say briefly that the first sentence in Ukrainian is one that I heard my mother say to me a lot on the phone when she was at a loss for words for whatever reason. Losing my first language. Я маю дурну міну. I wear a stupid expression, and my sister agrees. Gone my words for pipe, for wig, for lovely daughter. For may a duck kick you when someone presumed dead shows up? Where is the language of the nightingale, of the child who received the song of Ukraine when St. Nikolai ran out of toys? Where are the words of barn mice predicting bitter winters, warning a flood? The second one I'm going to read, page 70. And this, thank you very much, Lisa, for your introduction. And this poem has to do with names and growing up with an unusual name. It has nothing to do with the beautifully brave way that you attempted to say Natalka Bielitz, and I never get offended at all if somebody mispronounces my name, at least not the first 5 times. And I mispronounce even Ukrainian quite a few times. So this has more to do with deliberate kind of bullying that I experienced growing up with an unusual name, to the point that a gas station attendant suggested I change my name to my parents, and my father went along with it, and my name got changed to an American name, and I reclaimed it in college. So anyway, our names. Coughed into hands, scrawled on damp surfaces, misspelled, unrecognized, anesthetized, analyzed. Our names tagged as liars, out of control fires, reinforced with wires, twisted into barbs with pliers, claimed, maimed, who put the blame on the lame that spewed from us? Before we fell in love, before whatever happened to baby Jane happened to us, our hearts crumbling like old mansions, before we signed off. That's my little rant, and always feels good to read it. And the third one I'll read is from my most recent book, Those Absences Now Closest. And it is a poem that has, I wrote for my sister, but it also speaks of authenticity and getting below the surface of things. And it's called Without Makeup, for my sister. I didn't know your late in the day eyes, cool, easy, calm lake of tired eyes. You would say a nothing green, nothing anyone would notice. I'd never known you hadn't slept, face as bland as a manila folder, without the blue smoke pencil drawn along your lower lids, silver pewter smudges running like paths of winter rain. I didn't know your eyes set the dinner table, made the bread rise, turned violets into jelly. I didn't know your eyes had candles. Maria, we are the only two left of our first family. Our parents now streaks of bygone stories, even our mother's brightest shade of tangerine lipstick can't bring back. Something has washed the mascara away. Vaseline rubbed your lashes. You call it tired, unmotivated, grouchy looking. Apologize for apologizing. But I'm just beginning to see spring grass under snow, deciding which green. Thank you for that opportunity to read those. And I'd love, Maria Luisa, to hear your voice now.
Thank you, Dzvinia. What is interesting that you shared in terms of losing your first language, Dzvinia, you know this, but and some audience members will as well, is that for the first 18 years of my life, I associated Spanish, my home language, my Puerto Rican Spanish, as a language of violence, violences, and silences. And American English became my, my saving grace, my saving space, even at the cost of identity. So when I write poems about my parents, my relationship with my father, my relationship with my mother, I feel as if I were to reflect the title of my first collection, Gathering Words, Recogiendo Palabras. I'm recovering. I'm excavating words and language that do not hurt me. And when I envision, for instance, with the first poem, To Be Loved, it's again, to borrow Audre Lorde's phrasing, this is this biomythography. Like, how do I recreate these myths, these biographies of my parents, of myself, that they did not language, but I have observed since babyhood. Mm-hmm. All right, so this first poem is To Be Loved, from Destierro, means more than exile. At 5:01 a.m., música wakes the clock radio. It sings boleros in the empty bedroom, alerts the parakeets of Papi's visit in dreams. 2 years, 2 months now. Mommy sleeps in the guest room. It's wallpaper, mail a prayer flyers with Jesus, hazel eyes like Papi's, imploring. At 73, Mommy still wishes to stay, not go. 49 years together. Still, she finds his orphan's ache bottomless. Su espíritu yearning to be loved. This next poem has to do with secrets my mother kept from my father in terms of illnesses that we children had. And I did not know this until I was older, that I almost died when I was 2 months old in Puerto Rico, where I was born. So dicen, they say, dicen When I arrived in Manati heat, head covered with curls, the women warned mommy, cover them with a cap against el mal de ojo. She listened, but it was not enough. Mommy dice, 2 months into this life, your eyes rolled up white. Your tummy ballooned hard as if filled with river rocks. El doctor, shaking his head, sent us home for you to die. Tia Raquel bundled up my grief, took you and me to see a woman dressed in white, black hair flowing up in incensed air. Her hands floated over your prone body, never touched the taut skin of your jutting belly, scanned you from head to toe with prayers and tongues I didn't know. How your bowels emptied, rushing poison, how your life returned to me. And on this last poem for now this is from Thought Here Would Cure Me of There. For any of you who've read it thus far, it's intentional. I do have no titles, in this. So, Leanna James Blackwell, one of my sister girlfriends and mentors, who's a playwright, says this reads like a memoir, poetry and memoir. So I'm going to launch into this. Okay, the season of dying aunts and the severe lightning storms in mommy's face. I prayed to God, Goddess, Yemaya, Guanyin el Universo, to take a year off my life to give to mommy. Yes. Your romantic loving was cold, my widowed beloved. Your first marriage, arranged by Nigerian fathers, meant no years of desire. But your passions for fasting to become closer to God, your 5 a.m. prayer circles by phone, your swaying back to me in bed, you then kneeling naked at my feet, urging me to pray for healing, not the loss of any day of my life, tethered me to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Luisa. That was absolutely beautiful. You'd mentioned right before you started reading about language, the association you had formed
Yes.
with language before you got to really uncover and rediscover it for yourself. Do you recall any particular event or moment when that really started to happen for you? Was it something that you had read or something in your own writing that steered you toward?
Thank you. So in terms, thank you, Dzvinia, for that question. It's interesting that for me, languages became escape rooms, for me. So whether they were in 3 years of Latin in high school, 2 years of classical Greek, taking over those letters and writing secret notes, about, with my best friend Sandra T in Greek using the English language. But it was only not even in college. It was when I was an admissions counselor that I was just sort of scanning books in the poetry section that I encountered Judith Ortiz Cofer's The Latin Deli. Poetry and prose. And that was the first time ever that I had ever read a poetry collection with prose by a Puerto Rican poet. Keeping in mind, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in Springfield, and zero poets who looked like me, zero poets who sounded like me. And growing up in a household with no books, all I had to be, all the others, if you will, of my experience were African American poets and literary figures and so forth. And so being a woman of color, that's what I gravitated toward. But with Judith Ortiz Cofer, that was that first time. She gave me permission to code switch unapologetically. She gave me permission to write down stories and understanding that truth is different than fact. Emotional truths were more important than fact. So Dzvinia, please, I'd love for you to share as well in terms of because I love your poem, Losing My First Language, but I'd love to, in terms of your genesis of that, your experience with language.
Oh, thank you. Yes, my first language was Ukrainian. We were not permitted to speak English at home, even though I'm American born. We learned it in time for first grade. I learned it off of the TV set, basically. And I had two sort of experiences with the Ukrainian language and Ukrainian poetry, which is my sister and I had to go to like Ukrainian school for a number of years on Saturdays, and we had to recite poetry. But the poetry was very sort of patriotic, extremely nationalistic, without really understanding what is this about. I mean, my parents, once they settled in the United States, they never forgot their roots, obviously, because they wouldn't let us speak English at home, but weren't they weren't holding on to the past. I visually saw them turn into children. We had 10 acres of meadow and 7 dogs, a horse, and I saw them play. They wanted to catch up for what they had lost during the war. But it didn't bring me close to the Ukrainian language. It wasn't until I started translating poets who contacted me from Ukraine in the 80s and the 90s that I came across Natalka Bilotsarkivits's work, and she wrote about love and existential things, and it wasn't this pounding, you know, oh, my motherland, which means something obviously to me differently. But when I was coming of age, I resisted it. And so that it was sort of serendipitous that I was invited in 2020 by Ali Kinsella to translate this book, which became a labor of love during quarantine and a way to get close to another life when everybody was pulling away. The second thing that when I grew up, there's a saying in Ukrainian, "Ukrainska mova це mova solov'ya," which means the Ukrainian language is the language of the nightingale. And because it's so sonorous, it's so melodic, it's so beautiful. But also, I knew the Ukrainian that wore me was the Ukrainian of songs that my father sang, and they were always either in A minor or E minor. So I like to say I was raised in a minor key. And all these like beautiful folk tales. And that really got under my skin, and I believed it wholeheartedly. But then when I was translating Natalka, there was a poem that's called The Bridge. And I'm not going to take time to read it, but it has this wonderful line. Oh, it opens up, arched like a bridge over a river. It's so quiet. The nightingales must be drinking their own black alcohol. And I thought, oh, what are these nightingales doing drinking black alcohol to boot? And I mentioned that to Ali, and she said, well, that the folkloric language was very much used as a way to marginalize Ukrainians. Because, I mean, the language had already gone through many shifts because of like the naturalist sort of the village speak versus the highbrow versus the heavy Polish influence that was in place during the interwar stage in the 1930s and the beginning of World War II. But the language, as it became increasingly Russified, it really isolated all the folklore to just, you can have your Ukrainian language, but you have to keep it to fairy tales and nothing administrative, nothing political, nothing scholarly. So that was like a shock for me. And also, it was what inspired me in my new book to write the Disenchanted Desna after the Enchanted Desna, Alexander Dovzhenko's work, where the poems are after his work, his prose, but they incorporate a lot of the folkloric images that he uses with a different twist in it. Kind of an anti-Putin poem opens the series, but it was just for me to feel using that language, but in a way that was counter to what was trying to be done to it during World War II. So, and since,
Wow.
and as of today, ongoing.
So with the Nightingales, those absences, will you read that now or later? What was your plan, Dzvinia?
Oh, I could read it. I could read it now because it would have like the context, and then I want love to ask you a question about. Okay. It's called Nightingales. Slipped into silence, neither their once highly regarded melancholic songs nor tattered bags filled with brown feathers could be swapped back for once upon a time wisdom. Lacking purpose and star quality, no one cared anymore if, trapped in cages, they could sing single sonorous notes, or if scorched at dawn, be served on toast. Who is crying now? Who is beating the horse? Worrying too much, they turned into flycatchers.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, because in Dzvinia, because one of the questions that came up in our phone conversation, Dzvinia, and you gave me permission to repeat it here again because we trust each other. And my question to the audience members that I shared with Dzvinia on the phone is, have you ever considered writing a full collection of poems in Ukrainian? And that was a question that you responded so wholeheartedly, specifically to your experience. That I'd love for you to answer it here.
Oh, thank you, Maria Luisa. I can answer it sort of briefly. The answer is no. I don't feel I have that facility. Maybe someday I will, but the reason that I wouldn't is because the language has changed so much from the language that I spoke. The language that I spoke was very much mixed with Polish, because during the period when my parents were going through school and what have you, Polish was the language, the administrative language for those living in Western Ukraine. So actually, when I was growing up, my father did not appreciate any Polish being spoken because they really were fighting for their language, for Ukrainian. And I only picked it up because I heard my mother speak it. So quite frankly, I feel I don't know what I speak at this point. It's been, the boundaries and the tonalities have changed so much. And I feel the reason that right now I spend so much time working on translation, given every opportunity, is because Lost Horse Press does put out a dual language book, which means that they have all the poems in Ukrainian as the poet understands the language. And given the way things are looking, and we're not going to go there, this is a record of what the language was, because, people are still working to obliterate it. So I wouldn't be doing anybody a justice. I'd really need decades to achieve that kind of proficiency. But Maria Luisa, I'd love to turn the question back to you, because you are fluent in 4 languages, correct? And you
fluent in 3, conversational in 1. So far, yeah. So I'm going to give a shout out, to Mohammed Reza and Mona, who are on here, because Mona is my Persian teacher. So I'm reading some conversational, but I'm deepening it. Yes. Yeah.
So I'd love to know, like, in what order did they come, and was one, probably fit in more naturally with your upbringing, but then it's like, I remember we were working and I was like, so marveled at your fluency with German. It was so like, beautifully spoken, what you shared with me. So can you speak a little bit about how those 3 or 4 rivers came together into the one that you worked with?
Thank you, Dzvinia. So as I shared earlier, I definitely felt as if I were living on 2 linguistic islands. At home, the Spanish more of my father. And it's interesting now, Dzvinia, because and I'm very brutally honest with my mother, and she knows this, and I'll say this. After Daddy died in 2016, I could finally listen and hear the music of my mother's Puerto Rican Spanish. We only speak Spanish to each other. Of course, she's fluent in English. Yes. She works in, factories all her life, but It's like to hear the music of my mother's Spanish, to be able to converse and take trips and so forth, and to claim that music, that it was no longer overshadowed by my father's presence. So if that's, again, the recovering part is a long process. So meanwhile, in English, it's interesting. In English, in school, thanks to the public school teachers in the Springfield public schools in the 70s and 80s, I quickly understood that English became a tool of poetry. So I was geeking out. So imagine like being a 9-year-old, getting my first library card and being able to borrow books, bring them home and then get them back, and also I would always be the one with, by the cart that was outside the library with like the obsolete books that are torn and tattered and so forth. So I grabbed a Merriam-Webster dictionary without a cover. And I brought it home with me and I started reading the dictionary, and that's when I started learning rhymes. For example, I think in third or fourth grade. If I were a bird, it'd be very absurd. I remember that still because of playing with language. So these became a different way. And what was interesting that, again, thanks to public school teachers, I learned how to keep a journal for the first time. And for me, that was, and it was wonderful, although it was not so wonderful when I had 3 younger nosy brothers reading my journals. So I was looking for a language to claim as my own, and a common question I get is, how does a Puerto Rican end up in German? And I said, for very selfish reasons. I wanted a language to call my own, that I could journal in, that if I brought journals home, when I visited my parents, or, that my brothers could open it and they're like, nah, nah, and I could say, nah, nah, ja, du kannst das nicht lesen, ja, ja. And so I was like, you can't read this. And so that German, but also too, I'm going to thank, Frau Margaret Lichtefeld, my first German professor. Through her staunchly feminist, she enabled me to language my sense of gendered injustices, and also raise my feminist consciousness, aber auf Deutsch, in German. So I learned how to become a feminist in German and be able to work backwards to say, okay, this is what I language in Puerto Rican culture, so German. And again, thanks to Colby, and if I didn't study abroad in Colby, I would have dropped out. So I do thank Colby for my years abroad. I imagine as a first-year student, I'm 18 years old, going abroad in Germany, my second semester, and living with a German family and taking it very seriously, understanding I was a guest in their house and ich habe nur Deutsch gesprochen. I only spoke German. And they were so proud. Oh, Maria, das ist unsere amerikanische Tochter. And then coming back to Colby and feeling devastated by the institutional racism, keep in mind, this is Colby in the 80s. So it's like, 98% white? And I was of the 2% like running around, and I went abroad again my junior year. And I went this time to the south of Germany, Universität Konstanz. And there, German became meine Liebessprache, my love language. Again, I think Dzvinia and I, we talk about containers, perhaps, that the containers of my life experiences sometimes exceed the bounds of poetry. But my junior year, I fell in love with an Iranian. And so our love language became German, and then Farsi came in because he was from Iran. And it's like, wait a second, hold the phone. And it's like, he would have, it was a monthly phone calls to Iran, and they would last about 3 hours. And then when he got off the phone, ja, was habt Sie gesagt? Or was haben Sie gesagt? Nix. Alles ist gut. I'm like, yeah, you just gave you 4 words for like a 3-hour conversation. Please, child. So, but then in Germany, I only spoke German and German with him because my ex-husband then, he only knew 3 words in English. Hello, you are me, McDonald's. That's all I knew. So I picked up a German Farsi reader and taught myself how to read, write, and speak Farsi conversationally enough to be able to interact with my in-laws, And so, but in Farsi, I am also reclaiming after I divorced my ex, because I had a loving relationship with Mamani. May she rest in peace, my ex-husband's mother. She accepted me wholeheartedly as I am. And there's a lot. And so for me, 2 projects that are living in my head that I feel like I'm pregnant with twins. One is a cycle of poems honoring Mamani, one mother, And the other, in another collection of poems, only my mother's Puerto Rican Spanish. So those are twin. I'm pregnant with twin mothers.
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting. Oh my gosh. Well, Maria Luisa, has anybody ever suggested that you might be a bit of a genius? Because I swear, it's like when I listen to you
Oh,
talk all these languages, I don't know anybody who would say, I didn't want people to read my journal, so I just learned another language and wrote them in another language. I mean, and
yeah.
also, I love these sort of behind the scenes, like, mentor, mentee, student relationships, because it's like, God means everything to feel that were a good mentor or good, that you brought some light to somebody when they were working, but also it works the other way around, because I remember in our first exchanges and you started talking about language and you started, what bits that I got and I heard your German and everything. It was like from the mentor end, it was like, oh my God. Okay. Okay. I got to up my game. I've got like months with this woman who is absolutely brilliant, so it works, it's such a gift. It's such a gift both ways. I have a question that I would love to ask you, speaking of, our semester together. Your creative thesis was called This Hunger to Name. I believe that's what it was called. And I'm wondering, looking, almost a decade and a half later, um, have the hungers that you're naming changed, and have they gotten easier and more difficult to write about?
Great question. And I'm going to refer to a point that you made at your last reading that really resonated with me, Dzvinia, and and forgive me for paraphrasing, I hope you speak to it. Dzvinia, in her last reading, one of the ways that she talked about her body of work was, I feel as if I were as if I were writing the same poem
Mhm.
over years.
Mhm.
And for me, it's like different angles in.
Mhm.
So when preparing for this, I kept thinking about desires and loves. So this hunger to name, it hasn't changed. It's just different angles in. And I keep revisiting.
Mhm.
I keep deepening compassion for my father after his death to say I never had a really good relationship with him. He denied, I never did. I'm the only daughter. And the way that I would phrase it, he always wanted a daughter, but I'm not the daughter that he wanted,
Mhm.
and that was just the reality of it. But with that said, how do I show compassion for his experiences?
Mhm.
Because he still lives in me, as my mama lives in me as well. So different angles, and also understanding Svinia, because when you said that, I was like, oh snap. I've never experienced unconditional love from my parents.
Mhm.
I never heard them say, Maria, te quiero. Maria, I love you. Never. The only time, if my dad said it was when he was drunk. And when my mother said it, it's interesting, Svinia, talk about language. Mommy tells her grandchildren, her children, Maria, I love you, in like that, not in Spanish, in English. So in terms of the linguistic currency, where she feels safer saying, I love you in English, and she never says it in Spanish.
That is actually so fascinating, to me, and maybe to anybody in attendance today, because my parents showed me great love, but they never said I love you to me. And it's like, I'm with my kids, it's like, no matter I interrupt, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. So it wasn't like learned behavior, but the language of love was also tied into the natural world somehow, like and superstitions. And my father became a symbol of a frog, and when I, for some reason, after he passed, my mother attributed and said, when he wants to visit, he's going to thump along and we will see him. And that's not unusual. A lot of people have that as a way of dealing with loss. But I also remember in my MFA reading at Warren Wilson, when I graduated, before I gave my graduation reading, I said a prayer to my father, and I said, this reading is for you. Wish you had lived to know that I was doing this. And I have witnesses that after I was done reading in the auditorium, somebody yelled, "Oh my God, there's a frog." And there was a frog inside the auditorium, like jumping up the stairs toward me. So I've been thinking a lot about like the symbols and how that actually, and it's another subject, but what I'm fascinated leads to like OCD, because the language of love also meant these warning things. Oh, if you said that poof, with the salt, oh, if you did this, knock, 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 knock. So there are all these other things, and I don't know if it's the language of trauma that, I don't know, that somehow a survivor's guilt, that you feel that these lucky things happened and that's why you survived. Oh, you saw a frog, or you saw this, or this happened, or you got a hold of this, or a piece of, whatever your good luck charm is. So I think what you touch on, the idea of language of love and how it's articulated and how it was not connected to the language also, is super fascinating. I'll have to think of that more, but not on everybody's time. But really interesting.
Yeah, but reflecting on what you just said, because as you share that you're saying whether perhaps OCD or trauma, the third level is spiritual signs, spiritual sparks.
Yes.
Because the way that my mother has been navigating grief with me, because we're very spiritual. Because my mom was sometimes like, Maria, estoy loca. Am I crazy that I can still feel dad, feel papi? She called him my name. I said, no, my love. I said the veil between the corporeal world and the spirit world is so thin. It's like, and trust. And with dad, for example, one of papi's strengths, he was toward the end of his life before his amputations, it's like he was a magnificent driver. He had, if Google Maps had nothing on my daddy. So every time before I drive long distances, I invoke God and I invoke my father. And so it's a drive from here, 3.5 hours to West Springfield. And Dzvinia, the way that I feel is like, oh my gosh, I'm not driving. I'm in a train. Somebody else is driving. Somebody else is keeping me safe. And it's my father. Mm-hmm. Because in the spirit world, I tell my mom, he's whole again. He's not the double amputee. He's free of his traumas, and he's a guiding force for all of his children. And he marvels at that. He marvels there at his ability to be present everywhere, whereas he couldn't be in life. So for me, I feel like I have a better relationship with my father now after death than I did in person.
It's also interesting because associate locomotion in your work and the importance of it. And it can be, the physical ability to travel from one country to another, one state to another, or it can be resistance in the refusal to stay in one space or be trapped in one space. But as you were talking about driving, and that's why it's like, oh, that clicked in my head. And also, as a spirit being able to be in more places. How do you see that tying in with a sense of locomotion as being something that is or has been important to your work? And then the part two of that is like getting back to like the writing aspect of it. Do you experience this in the process when you write? So that's a two-part question.
Oh yeah. So locomotion, definitely, because it's taken me many years to realize that, in terms of locomotion, I move to save my life. I move to save my sanity. I move to protect my creative spirit. Mm-hmm. And being in the space right now, it's like I'm in this space that, oh my gosh, I don't have to move because there are no adversities to make me move, but rather I feel like I'm becoming unified in this space, and so a lot of, in terms of writing, it does, as and as we all know, as creative writers and as poets in the audience, it's like, sometimes, when I'm working with students who are newer to poetry, they're like, well, it just came on the page. I'm like, no, it's been gestating, germinating, percolating up in your head. It's just sometimes you need that lightning rod of a writing prompt or the presence of a mentor or teacher that all of a sudden pa, because that person phrased it this way, all of a sudden it just comes down. But it's been there. It's just sometimes that lightning rod moment that we need with our mentor or a poem, or an work of art that helps us to channel down, to bring it down. And for me, then, so writing does for me become a spiritual act. That's something that's not that mysterious that others can't replicate. But rather, no, trust it, trust this process, and then, and back to this video, it's like, you had the owl eyes. And so I was like, yes, like, be like my mentor, Dzvinia Orlowsky, with the owl eyes. It's like nothing escapes her notice. Nothing does. And that's why I do not believe in writer's block. I don't.
It's, it's interesting. I'm just going to, when you were talking about the importance of, like, you have to move, associate that with life. I just was thinking of James Wright. I think it's a prose poem where he's writing, and there's a little spider that comes on his hand, and he has this beautiful line where he says, "I wish I could be one mountain it could depend on, but I have to move or I'll die." And so I'm just thinking of that. I wish I could be one mountain that this little spider could depend on. When you're talking about prompts, I wanted to be sure to ask you, and I'd love to speak a little about it too, and perhaps read a quick poem. Persona poems. You've written persona poems, so there is that locomotion toward that. Would you like to read a poem or talk about that?
A persona poem?
Yes.
Maybe I'll take it from Gathering Words.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, and yeah. Second quickly. 1 second. Yep. Forgive me. Oh, yes. Thank you. Got it. Alcoholic in 5B. And I'll give you quick context. This was my when I lived in Somerville, Massachusetts, before my son was born, and my ex-husband used to beat me, not as much as my father did, but every couple of months. And we lived in Somerville, and so in apartment buildings, you could hear everything else that's going on. So we had a neighbor across the hall. Alcoholic in 5B. Her screams made me drop my damn vodka. I almost cried because that's 3 hours pay and some change, now worth piss on the floor. He's at it again tonight. I sweep up glass, hear chunks clink and scrape into dustpan. The mop's braids swirl as I try hard not to listen to her sobs. I know he's a good guy. Maybe if I rattle the keys in my lock, he'll hear me and stop.
Oh, it's beautiful. Do you recall, like, when you first felt like the persona poem was really going to be a good vehicle for you? Was it a particular time in your life? I mean, I'm sorry you.
Oh, great. And that's the thing, and I want you to. I want you to also speak as well, because I know that we're getting close to the end of time. No, but you're you're awesome. I just, no, because we're on the same wavelength. Persona poems became, again, persona means mask. And what happened in our drafts, when I tried to encounter that moment and I tried to say it in the first person, to me, it was melodramatic if I try to say it from my point of view. Mm-hmm. So I kept playing with points of view. Should I say it in the first person? Should I be in the third person? Wait a second. I always hear the neighbor across the hall, and just having a different optic, a different lens. And so the persona gave me the emotional distance to move away from the melodramatic moment of the trauma to have a view from the outside. Mm-hmm. So sometimes and it still has heat, in the poem, because a human is in that persona, it still has heat, but it's not melodrama.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because for me, it's like, you know, because for me, and again, these are like so many years ago, you know, but I didn't want it to be melodramatic, and so that's when persona will come into spaces for me, or into a poem.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wanted to add that I don't write a lot of persona poems, but I was thinking maybe I could just hold this up. The privilege to be invited to participate in this anthology. It just came out, Shattered, Artists Inspired by Artists, Artwork and Concept by Oana Maria Cajal, who's a Romanian-Canadian writer. And she paints abstract, kind of abstract works of art. This, I don't know if you can see. But we were supposed to sort of respond to them. And I found that was a really moving experience for me to go sort of ekphrastic, but not really, because there wasn't enough in the picture to really lead a narrative. But if I could, I'd like to read a poem that was inspired by one of her paintings. I basically bounced off the titles more than anything, but I love her work. And it was called Breaking News. And it seemed really relevant for what has been going on, unfortunately continues. Breaking news. What breaks one person revives another. What breaks into silence breaks through to eternity. But what if heaven is bombed and clouds no longer diaphanous, split like dried earth, crumble into dust, mortal as family? 2. What war? The soil is well drained for peonies whose only passion is to be unforgettable red. The hummingbird moth wishes for clover, the skin on your ankle for a blade of grass to sweep against it. What war? The sky has plenty of room. Petitions buzz like bees or lift into kites if you run fast enough, pull hard against the winds. 7 months in, no one reports the bombings anymore. What war? Silence. Imagine that. 3. Imagine 3 birds at night calling out to their mates, I made it, I'm still here. In the meantime, a woman lies trapped under the rubble of a 9-story building. Everyone's praying she's still alive. Prayer is hope. But what is hope other than guesswork? And guesswork is the surefire way not to get to heaven. So I appreciate reading that, and I wanted to just comment that I think that it is, whether it's the persona poem or ekphrastic poem or translation, it is so important, particularly as the world is going crazy, to interconnect somehow, whether it's responding to another person's poems or responding to their visual art, to have that dialogue, even if it doesn't get published, even if they don't know you're doing it, but just to enter that space where you feel that you are truly in communion with another energy, another life force, I think is going to become and is becoming increasingly important, if nothing else for our sanity, because where can we turn? Certainly not to breaking news, because breaking news breaks us, at least temporarily.
And Dzvinia, again, I'm going to go back to Lisa and Becca. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and also too that you're recording this, because the hunger that I'm feeling, particularly since the pandemic, since, and these things, these troubling or perplexing times, is that when we have a documentation of spaces that are possible, like here are like, it's not a mystery. Dzvinia and I are sharing, these are not mysteries in terms of being able to engage with translation work or engaging with ekphrastically. This helps us to stay human and connected, and saying, whether it's through the pandemic or through these brutal wars that are happening, and through this present, it's like, and that's why I will always firmly stand by what I say, is that, I don't believe in writer's block. When I do get negatively overwhelmed emotionally, I turn outward. I'll go online, I'm a member of the National Museum of Women in the Arts, or I'll go to my local, when I go back to visit Springfield, I'll look at murals or murals online, and they become a source of my focus outward. When I'm feeling emotionally incoherent, let me go out. Let me have, as Dzvinia so beautifully stated, let me have a communion with another artist, even if they were not to receive it. At least I know I can connect, I can bring it forth.
Right.
And with your permission, I'd love to a short poem that is a ekphrastic poem, which is uncanny because Dzvinia, the poem that you just read now, it's me duele el alma. It's better in Spanish. It hurts my soul. Me duele el alma, because it's true, and it's continuing, unfortunately, to be true. And so this hurting timelessness that's there. And for me, that's again that tuning fork of trauma or of pain. It's going to continue to resound for me, and so this poem is inspired by Faith Ringgold's painting "The Flag is Bleeding," which she painted in 1997. The title of the poem is "The Flag is Bleeding 2019," and it's in my collection Resistencia Resilience. 21 stars pin this mother's grief to royal blue, the sclera of her eyes scarlet. She can no longer see, no longer count. Her hands press against her Sunday dress, her remaining son, her remaining daughter, still wet from the bath, still safe in their unknowing. They stand on tiptoe, one on each of her broad brown feet, to keep her from falling, from reading with her fingertips the blooming glyphs of blood, names of massacred in this country. She's still afraid to call home.
Wow. That is so powerful, Maria Luisa. Thank you for reading that.
And also, Dzvinia, I deeply appreciate the way that you phrased the ekphrastic moment, because it's, for me, it was a diving board into her imagination. So, I had the joy of teaching the history and the present of ekphrastic poetry at Bard Micro College in Holyoke, and we were just jumping back and forth in terms of, is it descriptive or is it a diving board into imagination? I said, it's all of the above. That way, it's like there's no right or wrong to write an ekphrastic poem. For me, it's like the emotional resonance, that tuning fork, like what's making it vibrate.
Exactly.
What gives it heat?
Yes.
Because mere description does not. That's being ornamental.
Right. That's beautifully said. I love that idea of like the tuning fork and the heat and what makes that energy move, as opposed to just
Yes.
paraphrasing something. It goes a lot deeper.
Yes.
I wanted, again, if I may, I wanted to make sure that I got a tiny translation. That's not tiny, a very short translation from Ukrainian
Please.
to because these are very, very trying times. There's no question about it. And I just felt like if we're talking about language, I would feel wonderful to just share a short poem by Natalka Bilo-Sirkivitz, because this is an uplifting, happy poem of life that can be beautiful. And we all have to believe that still can and will exist, though we are tested on a daily basis to believe that. So it's untitled, because how can you title something like that? I'll read it in Ukrainian first. Життя просте і тихе, і я його люблю. Стоять навколо книги, як трави у гаю. Ласкаве і зелене, іде слово між слова, мов у губах у мене ромашка лісова. Life is simple and quiet, and I love it. Books surround me like grass in the grove, like chamomile to my lips, soothing and green, the word between words. So I wanted to contribute that and hope that in the word between words, we will find peace and we will find that happy space.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
I know. I'm still like taking that in. I wanted to let you know that we have about 20 minutes left and we have a few questions, and I wanted to give folks a chance to hear your answer. So the first one is from Dolly, and it's for both of you. Could you share your thoughts on the role of form in your poetic creative process? How does it shape your work, and is it important to you? Additionally, what advice would you give to poets looking to refine their skills and expand their understanding of form in their own poetic process? Who's going to take it first?
I'm gonna laugh because I think I use this, I use this for the MFA students at Bay Path in creative nonfiction. I use it for my undergrads. I'm teaching currently as a grad student world literatures too, multiple modernisms and cosmopolitan literatures. What I tell them, because when they say I can't write an MLA, it's like, stop, generate wildly, then think about your container. And so that crosses whether the academic paper and creatively. So for me, I generate wildly. And then after that, I understand, okay, what is the container? So for instance, thought here would cure me of there, and I'm just wanted to show it up. The poems have no titles. They're flush right. They're flush right on purpose. Because why? Because poems wanted to be flush right to sort of honor the Farsi. Farsi is from right to left. So I said, these want to go flush right, number one. Number two, it's like I generated wildly flush right, no titles. And the way that I said, I'm going to create my own form. I said, please learn the forms, but create your own forms. There's a cadence that is there, and so, and in this particular collection, if anyone has it handy, in the future, many of the poems, the last words of each line create a secret poem or an inner poem. And I'm going to give Jackie Brown, I think, who's on there. She's one of my sister girl from Solstice MFA. I had the joy of overlapping one semester with her. She was completing her MFA at Solstice in 2013, and I was coming in. And Dolly, this will come back to your point. Her graduate talk about the ends of the last words in lyrical lines or poetic lines startled me. And I've kept that in my mind since 2013. And when this collection came, I said, wait a second, I'm not ending any or most of these poems not on weak words, but on strong words. And it becomes like a prism, Prism, a prism. And so refracts back into the poem. And then in terms of destierro means more than exile. Here is that I with Tupelo Press, one of my poetry mentors, Margaret Szymowski, two of her collections were published by Tupelo Press. She passed away, unfortunately, due to early onset Alzheimer's. And what happened was I had to write a poem a day. I'm like, oh, Snapple, how am I going to do that and render it and have it be published on the site? So Dzvinia and I were talking, the ghazal. But ghazal became that conduit, that lightning rod. I was like, When I write ghazals, I have this refracted unity, that's fragmented unity that I can generate. So I simply did this. Took, for example, Dzvinia Orlowsky's collection down, read it, okay, and then a free-for-all of writing the ghazal. Yes, I'm right. Yeah, because I'm sorry. The reason I meant Dzvinia is because with this, I chose 32 women poets who inspired me personally. That's why. And then what I literally had, the only section of my library that was alphabetized was my poetry section. And I took the 32. Mark McCarney's here, Kathleen Aguera, Laurent Bossala, many of my Solstice, professors and mentors. And it's like, yes, and taking their collections down and refracting, entering, as Dzvinia beautifully said, entering in dialogue with the poet. And what I did afterwards, understand these poems were published online. I self-published this collection. And for those poets still living, I sent them a copy of the poem. So they were mostly a poem to acknowledge that. So let me stop because I'm talking a little too much. Dzvinia, please.
Hi, form. Well, I can say that Solstice teaches wonderful during the residency courses on form that can be audited. So I teach a brilliant one on Pantoons and villanelles. I'm kidding about that. But no, there sometimes, yeah, in fact, going to workshops and just being around people who are focusing on that, does help. I have basic things. As an image hound, I remember things in imagery, and I often didn't know why. So couplets always worked very well for me because it must have been the spiritual frog in me. I like to leaps of faith and have those little units just kind of spark and then wonder what the constellation is at the end. That must be a sign because my lights just went off. But anyway, um, I don't work in, I've written some villanelles. I've enjoyed working in pantoons. And on a particular occasion, I wrote a poem about the former Olympian, the Ukrainian ice skater, Oksana Bayul, who beat Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding. And it was such a shock because when she was up there, they didn't know, nobody could find a Ukrainian anthem. So in my poem, I say, well, maybe they'll play Russia's instead. But the poem is called Hope Was a Thing with Pink Feathers because she wore a pink feathered outfit and everybody was cheering, yay, because Ukraine was acknowledged at that point as an independent nation. But anyway, so that Pantoon form was like an ice skater going round and around and around. But I agree with what Maria Luisa said about just sort of be wild when you put the words on the page. And I would even say, if you can, put it away for 2 or 3 days so that you don't get that instant editor going. In fact, some of the best surprises have been when I've kind of allowed myself to forget a poem and then I pick it up and I think, oh, I wish I'd written down who wrote this. And it's like, oh my God, this is my poem. And without any expectations brought to it, you can see more clearly. Also something, and I don't know why this is, but I used to do it, and I actually still do it. But if I write a poem, I will hold it up to the mirror and read it in the mirror. And for some reason, I will see everything that's kind of not working. And I don't mean the writing the words, but just where the pauses are working. And I don't know how that works. It's like if that connects a different part of my brain, but visually there's like a connection or there isn't. And then secondly, I would urge you when you have this draft to, I psych myself into like thinking that I'm gonna, reading this terribly important poem, even though it's the first draft. And I read it out loud and pretend there's like 200 people in the audience and it'll tell me where to stop. It'll tell me where to break. It'll tell me, so performing that early draft or second draft in your room will also cue your ears and your heart to what needs more emphasis, whether there's gravity that's begging you to just rant all the way through, or you have a natural pause. So there's, everything from going to workshops, which I feel are very valuable, to, I don't know, standing on your head and barking before you read your own poem, whatever works privately. There are all sorts of things, be brave, try them.
Thank you so much. We have another question from Ellen about in those absences. If this is okay, I'm interested in hearing about the choice to compose a series of centos using the poems from one Ukrainian poet, Sahiri.
Yeah, Serhii Zhadan.
Yes. Why the work of this particular poet?
Okay, because Serhii Zhadan is probably the foremost poet, I would say, writing in Ukraine. He's an activist, he's a novelist, he's a rock music. I mean, but his poems are just outstanding. And there was a book called What We Live For, What We Die For that Yale University Press published that Virana Tkach and Wanda Phipps, who have been translating him for years, translated. And just try to make this brief. I was invited by them to read with Serhii for 2020 during quarantine. But what they asked was that I interact with one of his poems, and I keep the 2020 or the Roaring Twenties theme in mind. So I thought, well, let me pull out all the 20th lines of the entire collection and just scramble them, and then pick. At that point, I picked 20 to see if it would speak of a poem. And no matter how I worked it, I was knocked off my seat. And I was so in awe of it that I thought, let me pull out all his first lines. Let me pull out all his randomly eighth lines. Let me pull out all his ending lines. And I came up with these beautiful centos that are based on just his lines. And again, my intention is not to recreate a better poem out of the brilliant translations in his work. My intentions, because I've used this to teach also, is that as a poet, no line is wasted. And I tried doing this with my own poems and came up with a lot of duds. And I thought, okay, this is filler. I'm moving from here to here. But I was in awe that this poet, and again, due to the translators, that every line somehow, delivered. And so I had a lot of these, but and Carnegie Mellon suggested that I do the 9 as opposed to just 3 or so. And I can say it was a biatch to get permissions, which I didn't know I had to until the last hour. I had to write to Yale and tell them every single word, every single line I got, and got 160 permission lines. So it's like, I earned it. But anyway, his work is beautiful. So I highly recommend his work in general.
Thank you so much. Lisa, do we have any other questions that came through? Okay. We have about 10 minutes if you both want to end with a poem. I think that would be a lovely way to close out the night. You sound good?
Sure. Let me see. I wasn't thinking.
Yes.
Oh, I threw a curveball. I'm sorry.
No. Dzvinia, if you want, I'll go first and then you'll go second as you're looking for
Sure.
a poem to.
Sure. I don't mean to look while you're reading, but
Yeah.
I'm not.
No, yes. No, that's okay. Yeah. So this is in Destierro means more than exile. First, fierce steps for Audre Lorde and Mai Ayim. You inspired Afro-German women poets in Berlin to take what is theirs, their Germanness, their mother tongues, their skin, rise up, rise through the corrosive myth that German equals white equals purity equals go back to where you came from. Ich bin von hier. Wie du bin ich im Mutterleib gewachsen. Wie du bin ich vom Brot und Wasser und der gedämpften Musik einer deutschen Frauenstimme ernährt, die sprach und sang und flüsterte in ihren Träumen über mein Werden. Ich gehöre hierher, nirgendwo anders. I am from here. Just like you, I grew up in a woman's womb. Just like you, I was nourished with bread and water and the muffled music of a German woman's voice who spoke and sang and whispered in her dreams about my becoming. I belong here, nowhere else.
Beautiful. Thank you. And also beautifully read. I think since I was talking about the centos, I thought I would read the one that was based on 20th lines by Serhej Jadan. Cento 4. Angels on the submissive surface of the world, which people constantly borrowed. And all these preachers on lifeguard towers, everyone can find something if they only look carefully. No green valleys, no suburban wastelands. You will stand like a ghost in the fog, gold scattered about. In the noise and in the headlights are unspoken conversations, unseen heavens. Every sin is like a stone from the seashore that forces you to love. Now dreams break off and you inhale, writing into the void is like the love of trees that grow without you. There's nothing but sky the workers took home. Tell us anything that's not on the news. Thank you. And I apologize. We have 3 dogs who are got very lively there for a moment.
Oh my gosh. This is always such a hard part to transition from being a spectator to being a talker after being able to kind of just absorb all this brilliance. It was really lovely. I would love if folks wanted to, throw any last minute comments or unmute and say hello. We'd love to get a round of applause. Anything to show love to these brilliant women who joined us tonight. And I think Lisa has already put the books in the chat. And I think the only other thing that I would like to say before we sign off is that we hope that you come check out our website, come to our upcoming events. And I see, Richard Hoffman's here, and we're going to have him in May. So like, we're just excited for our upcoming events, and really glad that Dzvinia and Maria Luisa could join us tonight.
So please unmute and clap if you would like to, because they deserve a big round of applause.
Yay!
And I want to say again, Becca and Lisa, we got a glimpse of the behind the scenes, how beautifully organized you are, and this is such a gift to the writing community. So thank you so much. And Maria Luisa, a heartfelt thank you for when I contacted you. You said absolutely yes. This has been a magnificent reunion.
Oh my God, how could I? It's like we were so awestruck. And it was such a deep honor and a joy to be in conversation with you. May we continue to converse after this event as well.
And thank you, people.
And thank you again, Lisa and Becca, for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dzvinia, what were you going to say?
I was going to say thank you, everyone, for coming. I mean, really,
yes,
we appreciate that. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Have such lovely attendees that I love that we're on Zoom, because we can always be here no matter where we are. But sometimes I wish we were in a room so I could just see everybody, but I can still kind of see everybody. So yes, thank you, everybody. We hope to see you next month. And if you want to study persona poems, come and study with Jess Quayo on Sunday.
Sounds good.
Okay. Good night, everybody.